and welcome to the first of the IAA's compliance workshops for 2021. I'm Gail Bernstein, the IAA's General Counsel, and I'm delighted that all of you could join us today. This is our 25th year that we've conducted these workshops, and we very much hope that we will be able to return to an in-person version in 2022 so that we can connect with all of you face to face. We at the IAA are really missing that, so we're hopeful. In today's workshop, we're going to do a brief legislative and regulatory update, and we're then going to hear from senior staff from 9 of the SEC's regional offices. The rest of the day will focus exclusively on implementation of the SEC's new marketing rule. The workshop sessions will be moderated by the IAA's crack legal team, Associate General Counsel Sarah Busher, Monique Botkin, Laura Grossman, and Sanjay Lamba. And they'll feature a roster of incredibly impressive speakers whom I'd like to thank in advance. Thanks also to the IAA strategic partner, ACA Group, which is sponsoring our workshops this year. And finally, just a quick shout out to the IAA's events team, Lisa Gillette and Megan Olson. None of our events would ever happen without them. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get going. We're going to be using Zoom for all of our sessions, and you will have received email instructions for each session. Most sessions are going to require that you leave one and hop onto another. So pay attention, please, to your emails. For most of today's sessions, you're going to be in listen-only mode. You may submit questions to the speakers by typing them into the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and only the speakers will be able to see those questions, and they'll try to address those questions as time allows. Most of today's sessions are going to be recorded, but we will not be recording any of the SEC's breakout sessions. If you are seeking continuing education credit for attending the workshop, this is what you'll need to do. Speakers are going to announce verification code words at various points during the sessions. So please make a note of both the session and the code words when you hear them. Your reminder email has further information on what to do, but I wanted to be sure that you'll be on the lookout for those code words. At the end of Neil's and my update on developments, I'll provide instructions on how to get to the next session. A link to all of the background materials was also emailed to you, so you should be all set on that. Phew, okay, so with all the housekeeping out of the way, let me invite my colleague Neil Simon, the IAA's government relations guru, to join me in a brief legislative and regulatory update. Neil, why don't we start on Capitol Hill?
Well, thank you, Gail. I think you're probably all aware that the oxygen level inside the Beltway is low because it's all being sucked out by deliberations over the so-called Build Back Better Act. The White House's pick your number. It started as $3.75 trillion. It's now probably down somewhere between 1.6 and $1.9 trillion. In any case, IA weighed in heavily on the Build Back Better Act on your behalf because there were quite a few provisions that would unnecessarily and potentially severely limit the investment choices that retirement plan sponsors and investment advisors may consider for retirement accounts. This is a big deal. And let me just go and touch upon some of the provisions that were in the act. And let me clarify that the 2,468-page Build Back Better Act came out of the House Ways and Means Committee back in September. That was the $3.7 trillion plan. It has now been whittled down. And in fact, last week, the House Rules Committee released a 137-page framework for this spending package. And much of what we know about the final text of the bill, which is being developed as we speak by the House Rules Committee, is based on this 137-page framework. Let me tell you about some of the provisions that were in the bill that appear to have been dropped. One, auto enrollment. There was a provision that would require employers with 5 or more employees and without retirement plans to automatically enroll employees in 401k plans. We lobbied Congress on this because there was a provision saying that the default option for these investments could be determined by Treasury. In other words, Congress and regulators were going to substitute their judgment for yours when it came to the default options for auto-enrolled employees. We did contact Congress about this. We put out a Take Action Now alert asking you all to contact Congress about the provision, and it appears to have been dropped. It's not in the 137-page framework I described to you earlier. There was another provision in the bill, and again, any of these could come alive again, although I'm not expecting it, but there was another provision in the bill that would disallow IRA investments that require accredited investor status. So all private placements were out of IRA plans. And then finally, there were so-called mega Roth provisions, which may be coming alive, according to a Bloomberg report earlier this morning, that would prohibit Roth IRAs with an excess of $10 million. Again, that provision may be being restored. Also not included in the Build Better Act, although it had been discussed extensively, was a proposal to change the tax treatment of ETFs that would have subjected these funds' use of in-kind transactions to capital gains tax. We also opposed this and got in touch with Senate Finance Chairman Wyden about it. In any case, the House Rules Committee right now is developing the final text, and it is tweaking the bill in order to ensure it has the votes to pass. Democrats only have effectively a three-vote margin in the House. So there are lots of deals being done. Paid leave is in play. Discount drug pricing for Medicare is in play. But I am hopeful, with the potential exception of the so-called mega Roth provision I just mentioned, that the other provisions about which we weighed in and you weighed in, most importantly, have been dropped from the bill. So please stay tuned. Obviously, this is of enormous consequence. Let me just pivot to something else in the tax and retirement space, and that is the so-called Secure Act 2.0 retirement savings bill. I think, as you know, IAA is very much in favor of any plans coming out of Washington that will enhance the ability of taxpayers to save for their retirement. And in fact, Secure Act 2.0, I think once the reconciliation bill gets out of the way, will be revived. This is a bipartisan piece of legislation. There's not that much of that in Washington, D.C. It was pushed by Richie Neal, the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, and the ranking minority member, Kevin Brady from Texas. Among other things, it would increase the age for RMDs, required minimum distributions, from 72 to 75, allow 403B plans to invest in CITs, and increase catch-up provisions. It also has voluntary auto-enrollment provisions for employees, a provision that was picked out of the Secure Act, plopped in the reconciliation bill, revised in ways that we were not pleased, and again, it appears to have been dropped. But stay tuned, because once this reconciliation package is out of the way, I am hopeful that attention will return to Secure Act 2.0, and together with you, we'll be involved in that. So I do expect we will be asking you to contact Congress about the bill. It's an important piece of legislation. Not expecting it to be enacted into law this year, but maybe by this Congress in the next session, activity could begin or be renewed on it in December. Okay, I'm running out of time. Let me just very quickly mention that we have not abandoned gaining advisory fee deductibility. We tried to get it in one of the COVID relief packages earlier. We have not succeeded, but it's still a big issue, restoring the deductibility that existed before the 2017 tax cut. Also pass-throughs. We're still working to make owners of advisory firms organized as pass-throughs eligible for the 20% pass-through deduction. There's some positive developments there, but nothing to write home about yet. And then finally, we're also supporting diversity, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion legislation on the Hill. This is a priority for the association and something we'll continue to work. Well, Gail, that was quick, but I think I covered what I intended to. Back to you.
You sure did, Neil, and thank you very much. There's obviously a lot going on these days on the regulatory front as well. Gary Gensler has been chair of the SEC since April, and the SEC now has 3 Democratic and 2 Republican commissioners, and this is going to allow Chair Gensler to implement a lot of his agenda probably, and it is an, an ambitious agenda. I'm going to touch on just a few of his priorities here, and the IAA is actively engaging and advocating on your behalf on most of these issues. So of course, there's climate risk, sustainable investing, and as Neil mentioned, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are huge issues for this administration, and the SEC is going to be acting in this space. This chair is also particularly interested in digital or crypto assets. And the SEC also has an initiative out that is looking at digital engagement practices and digital, or what some people call robo advice. This SEC is also going to put private funds even more under the microscope than they have been. And we're also expecting to see proposed rules on what the chair is calling cybersecurity, risk management, and cyber hygiene. On the trading side, there are enormously complex and important market structure issues, and also issues relating to proxy voting and executive compensation. So it is shaping up to be a busy couple of months, if not years, and we might all be expecting some early Christmas presents coming out of the SEC. I'm going to talk just a bit about ESG, DEI, and digital engagement practices. But before I do, I should mention that probably the most important regulatory development for advisors this past year is the new marketing rule. But since the rest of today, is going to be spent on that rule, let's leave it here for now. Another rule that the SEC is looking to update, and it's on its Reg Flex agenda, is the custody rule. This is probably the rule that we at the IAA get the most questions about. So we are delighted that the SEC is looking to modernize this rule. We really hope that the SEC will take a step back and completely reconceptualize the rule and keep any prescriptive requirements limited to actual or physical custody, and then focus on matching principles-based controls to the actual risks involved in various ways in which advisors have access to or authority over client assets. Now, turning to ESG, let me first remind you that our second workshop on November 18th will be fully dedicated to ESG. So hopefully we'll see all of you there. So what's been going on? Excuse me. What's been going on at the SEC in this space? Earlier this year, then acting chair Alison Lee put out a request for input on corporate issuer climate disclosures, and she also mentioned advisor disclosures. The IAA commented on that request for comment. We encouraged the SEC to look at corporate disclosures first before looking at fund or advisor disclosures, since advisors need the corporate data to make their investment decisions. Like others, the IAA is calling for consistent, comparable, and reliable mandatory baseline disclosures from issuers. The SEC is also looking, as I mentioned, at advisor and fund disclosures, and this, I believe, will be along the lines of do as you say and say as you do, and I expect that that's a theme we're going to hear from our SEC guests quite a bit about that. We anticipate proposals in both of these areas very soon. The examination division is looking at ESG as part of its inspection priorities. It says it's not making a judgment on what ESG means, but it's looking at how each advisor is describing how it is using ESG factors, and then how it's disclosing and making sure that all of its practices are consistent with those disclosures. We also expect to start seeing enforcement actions on ESG very soon. There's a dedicated ESG task force in the enforcement division, and we think it's been really looking at these issues. We also expect to see proposals out of the SEC relating to diversity issues, human capital as well. It's not yet clear whether these will relate to disclosure or include any substantive requirements as well. Another priority that I mentioned is digital engagement. The SEC's interest in this appears largely to have arisen from the GameStop volatility earlier this year, but really the SEC is interested in all ways that advisors and broker-dealers use technology to connect with clients and customers. The SEC put out a request for feedback. It's looking to understand the market practices associated with the use of digital engagement practices, or a new acronym, DEPS, very broadly. Much of the release is focused on practices that arise in the broker-dealer context, but the SEC's definition of depths we think is broad enough to capture things like digital educational material that advisors put out. So we're keeping an eye on that space, and we submitted a comment letter. The SEC is also looking at the use of technology to provide investment advice. So basically digital or robo advice. The SEC appears to be concerned that conflicts might arise in connection with whether the technology is used to maximize the financial interest of clients or to maximize the financial interest of the advisor. But there are also lots of questions about policies and procedures around digital advice. In 2017, the SEC staff put out extremely helpful guidance that reaffirmed that digital advisors are fiduciaries just like all other types of advisors, and that they're subject to the same regulatory framework as other advisors. We've argued strongly that the SEC should not change this and treat advisors differently based on the method by which they provide advice. All advisors need to tailor their practices and their compliance programs to their business models and risks, and digital advisors are no different. This is something that the IAA feels very strongly about, and we plan to engage with the SEC on this. As I mentioned, Chair Gensler is also keenly interested in developments around digital or crypto assets, and we're definitely seeing more advisors either starting to invest in these assets on behalf of clients, or at least trying to learn more because clients are showing more interest. This is an area of focus for the exams division as well, and so we're going to probably see more enforcement cases here too. As for private funds, expect to see an even greater focus on conflicts and fees and expenses, as well as on disclosures. On the trading side, there's both an industry and a regulator push to shorten the settlement cycle from T+2 to T+1 to reduce settlement risk. We understand that the SEC is even thinking about going to T+0, which in our view, the financial services infrastructure is not quite ready for yet. The IAA is part of an industry effort to make any transition go smoothly, and we've been in to talk to the SEC staff about the challenges advisors are likely to face with a shortened settlement cycle. So I think that's probably a good place for me to wrap up. It looks like we're getting to be out of time. So let me give you a little bit more housekeeping. We're going to move to breakouts for the SEC regional offices now. If you are attending breakout 1, which is Midwest and South, just stay right here. Neil and I will drop off and your guests will arrive. If you're attending breakouts 2 or 3, which are Northeast and West, please log out of this Zoom, return to your reminder, excuse me, your reminder email or calendar, get the link to the session that you'd like to attend and jump on. Please sign in as soon as possible so we can get started, and we'll take a break afterwards. Thanks for listening to us and enjoy your day.